Hello and welcome to the Getting There Show, where we speak with brilliant people and unpack the key influences and decisions that have helped them get to where they are today. You'll get the books, the mental models, the inspirations, and all the steps in their journey to help guide you on your own path. As Isaac Newton said, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." Today's giant is a fantastic guy called Padraic McMahon, who started his career as a chart-topping musician in a band called The Thrills, before climbing the ranks at Google, LinkedIn, and HubSpot. He's got an MBA with distinction from Trinity College and now leads a customer success team within HubSpot, managing their biggest trailblazing customers. This episode is packed full of insights for those wanting to break into tech, as it dives deep into customer success as a business function and why customer success is so important to tech companies. We discuss all sorts here, such as why the best customer success managers are like quarterbacks, why customer success is the perfect springboard into other roles within an organization like product and operations, why a sense of ownership is a key skill, and why the active listening skills Padraic learnt whilst touring with the likes of Oasis and U2 has set him up well in the wonderful world of tech. As always, we make sure to include all of Padraic's toolkit and influences in the show notes, so as to maximise the chances that this show helps you get to where you want to get to. Padraic, welcome to the podcast. How you been?
Good, Fred. It's good to see you. I'm delighted to be here chatting to you. It's been well. I've been locked at home for quite a while with COVID. So me, my son, and my wife all got it through Christmas, but we're all healthy and we're all fine. But it was just some nice time together with a toddler running around, wrecking everything. And but we had a very different Christmas. But I'm well, thank God.
I'm not going to tell you what I did, Padraic, because I was fortunate to head off to the Slovenian mountains and we had zero COVID.
Good. Well, you deserve it, Fred. There's no shame in that. Delighted you got away as well.
And how was COVID?
Like my wife saw the best of it. She's a bit of an optimist, and we got to spend loads of time with our son, and we were both fine. We're no symptoms really. I just was sick for a day or two. But I think she's the optimist, whereas I'm the more kind of skeptical about it. Going when you're locked in an apartment with a toddler for 10, 12 days, 13 days nearly, all in, it can be a bit intense. But yeah, like last year, the good side of it is I got to spend a ton of time with my 18-month-old son and my wife, which is always nice. And we didn't have the busyness of running around to 10 households and all the visits and all that kind of chaos. So yeah, I got through on a healthy balance of long baths and red wine.
Oh, that's a fantastic combination. And I saw that you recently bought your son his first guitar, so that must have been quite amusing.
I did. He's only 18 months, so his way of being engaged with it is just to smash it off the floor like his daddy after a gig, and that's around as much as he's playing it. So he's got all the right moves, but yeah, he'll pick it up in time, I'm sure.
He's got that in his DNA, Padraic. That's a very good sign.
Yeah, fingers crossed. If he picks up that, he'll be okay.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Padraic. I've been wanting to get you on the show for quite a while because I've noticed over the past few years that business school students are increasingly interested in getting into tech, and I think customer success is a really interesting route into tech. So I'm sure that today's conversation is going to be really, really useful. To kick things off, it would be great if you could lay out a sort of potted history of your career to date, because it's absolutely fascinating.
Okay, well, I'll try and do it in 60 seconds, even though this can take 60 minutes. I graduated back in 2000 in business and marketing, so I was always kind of interested in it. At the time, I set up my own company. I did a thesis in the small to medium enterprise sector in Ireland and this thing called the internet in the late 90s and how it was going to affect business and technology. So that was one of the first, was the first published thesis in the area in Ireland back in the early noughties. So that kind of propelled me straight out of college into setting up my own company where I designed websites and did early digital marketing for companies, Irish small to medium businesses, which didn't have an affordable site solution at the time. So I just built sites. and paid the bills. Did that for 2.5 years, and then I helped two universities in Dublin asked me back after to help amend their syllabus and actually work on their business and marketing syllabuses syllabi to actually cater for and how it might be affected by this thing called the internet, which they hadn't even looked at yet. So I came back, consulted with them for 6 months, helped them redraft a lot of the courses, and kind of help their professors and things think about things. And then they realized at the end of it, they didn't have anybody to teach this. So then they said, well, Padraic, can you come back and teach? So I had the business over here, I graduated, and then I was teaching web design and technologies in one college and e-commerce and strategy in another university for 2.5 years. So I had 100 of my own students, and it was great fun. And then in 2002, I gave in all my papers at the end of the year and said I can't teach next year because I'm going to Los Angeles to record my debut record, because we've just been signed with Virgin and EMI globally. So went to LA and recorded our album in 2002. That was released in 2003, and then spent the next 6 years probably selling over like 1.5 million records on 3 albums with EMI and the band called The Thrills. Then we toured and recorded solidly until around 2008, 2009. Hung up our boots then as 30-year-olds. We were all pretty tired. And then went back was going to be a photographer for the Reuters agency. So I was mixing up whether I go get shot at in Basra with my Leica, or whether I go and work back in tech with the playing foosball on Barrow Street with Google. So I decided I'd dip my toe back into tech to see how it felt on the office life, and I loved it. Fell back straight in love with it. In 2010, we worked in Google obviously together, and then worked in Google for 2.5 years and went to LinkedIn. Worked there for nearly 6 years. Then went back to being a student, all the way back to the start. Gave up my job, went back to being a poor student, did a full-time MBA in Trinity College. Really enjoyed that, got a distinction, and then spent a few months traveling Japan, China, and New Zealand, and then started working in HubSpot on customer success, where I'm coming up to year 3, managing our European global accounts team and customer success. So that's the 3-minute or 4-minute career history of where I am today.
Wow, now that is quite some journey, Padraic. If it was a 3-minute single, that would definitely get to the top of the charts.
Good segue. Fair enough.
Let's dive into HubSpot, because it's a business that I know quite a lot about, but it's a business that I'm sure many of our audience are not aware of. So what does HubSpot do?
So it helps companies grow and grow better. So it's a suite of sales, marketing, services, and operations tools that helps businesses manage their pipelines, manage their full CRM, so all wrapped around a full CRM. So it essentially helps them find, attract, and delight and service customers.
And from my understanding, it started off as a sort of marketing automation tool, and then it's sort of grown to become a platform.
Correct. Yeah. So it started very much as an almost like an early stage like inbound email tool, and then expanded, like I said, into a kind of what we have called or deem a kind of a flywheel approach, which is how to attract, service, and delight. Customers, and all that is wrapped around a really powerful CRM, which is the kind of biggest growth space, I think, in the company, and is setting us on a competitive thread out to to Salesforce as well as companies like Marketo traditionally. So huge high growth company. Been a ton of fun. I've only been here 3 years, and it's been different, or wildly different every year.
Yeah. Well, I must admit, it's a CRM tool that I love to use every day. And I think it can provide real value to any business. How many customers do you have at HubSpot?
Around 134,000 plus now. So that's exploded year on year. Our customer acquisition rates have been huge as our headcount growth, but HubSpot has been expanding its customer base aggressively over the past few years, and into new directions as well. We have what's called in business school terminology called like a bimodal strategy, which is a push up and down. So we're furthering a kind of a long tail expansion into our kind of core bread and breakfast of small to medium enterprises. But similarly, at the same time, there's been a really aggressive what we call upmarket push, which is to larger corp/enterprise entities. And kind of that's where we're competing against bigger enterprise players. And that upmarket push has been like very aggressive, and it's where my team specifically sits, which is servicing large global enterprises, and who are taking HubSpot to its very limits and kind of and teaching each other where to go and how to service that profile of a customer. But yeah, 133,000, I think, is the last market earnings release.
Wow, because I've noticed over the past 2 years that there's been a real acceleration in terms of new product functionality.
Yeah, massively. I think it was after as well. It was my 5th week in the business, so it was nearly 3 years ago, or it was 3 years ago, where we had what we call a crit sit, which was actually a platform failure. It was for a few hours it was the last day of Q1 in 2019. So obviously a lot of businesses globally are using our sales tools on the last day of the quarter. And it's you never want any kind of site unreliability, and we always perform extremely well in terms of our platform reliability and uptimes, but this was a very unprecedented hit. Took a long time to regain trust and speak to our customers. We were on the front lines for quite a while, in the same way we were when COVID hit our businesses as well, our customer base. But with that situation, actually the business put a hold on product development for quite a while, in terms of investing a lot of resource into site reliability and into the architecture, or the mainsail, we call it the trust and security mainsail at HubSpot. And we actually paused quite a bit of product development through the next few quarters to make sure that we redid the entire architecture of HubSpot to scale. So they took that moment to build it in terms of go-to-market push as well. And then from then on, I think the product teams at that stage were, after investing so much internally, were then ready to really start aggressively pushing release, and have been on fire since, in terms of the new products that our existing sales teams and our existing customers are now able to avail of, which is keeping everybody very, very fresh.
Right. So let's now look at customer success as a sort of business function. As I mentioned at the start, we've seen a lot of business school students get more and more interested in tech, and from my experience, like, customer success is a really, really interesting space to be. So it'd be great to find out a bit from you as to what customer success is, and why it matters so much to any business.
Yeah, I think to hit the first answer first. Want to answer the second? No, I'll take the first. I think for me, customer success is defined very differently, firstly, depending on what company you're working in. If you're working in a bank or you're working in tech, even in tech, customer success in Google or LinkedIn was very different to what it is in HubSpot. So it's kind of where the customer ownership really lies, in my view, is customer success, is where, if you think about the sales cycle, you have a lead, which is picked up by a BDR or an account executive. You have a salesperson who sells a company, the software or the product of that business. Then somebody's got to own the account. They're now a customer. Somebody's got to keep that account. Somebody's got to grow that account. In different tech companies, that exists still in sales. Sales still own the account. Some it's owned by customer success. Some it's owned by both. Sometimes sales and customer success are working hand in hand, which they do at HubSpot. Other times are completely disparate. So even at that, from company to company, at LinkedIn it was different as well. The roles and responsibilities of the customer success business and organization can be very different, and there can also be different cultural elements to it. In one business, the customer success team might be more of a cap in hand team. Another, they might be actually the real power horse of that business. So it can differ. The one thing I think that across all that is that it's some kind of a mix of a post-sales environment. So the main acquisition of the customer has been done, and that is a very deliberate dance and a skill set of net new sales. And the kind of archetype of a person or an employee or a human being that loves that, environment might be different from the person who loves a customer success environment, which is more of a longer term, multi-year relationship with an organization to bring it from year 1, 2, 3, 5 plus and be part of that journey. Both, as a customer success individual owning that account and partnering with sales teams that can help identify growth in that customer. So it's kind of difficult to define, but I think the best way of doing it is saying like that is largely a post-sales team who are accountable for both the retention or the raw retention and the growth of a customer. Now, some customer success organizations say, listen, our job, we've got 1,000 customers. Our job tomorrow is to have 1,000 customers. We are purely defensive, and it doesn't matter what they're spending. Our job is to get like no churn. And we had that in HubSpot for quite a while. And then other companies that have a more of a revenue retention outlook, which is we have 1,000 customers today to spend $1 million. Next month, we need to have our customers spending $1.1 million. Now, part of that is you don't have a leaky bucket. You don't want to be losing customers. You want to be keeping them. But you also want to be growing them. And it's a dance of the two. And that's where we are at HubSpot. So I think that revenue retention model, I think, is more elegant and more truthful in terms of like the importance of a customer success org. So kind of segueing into the second part of your question, which is like, why is it important? So I'm quite passionate about this because in tech, customer acquisition is key. You need to be able to grow aggressively. You need to be hitting like 110, 30, 40% year-on-year growth with your customers. Now, new customer acquisition and sales will do that. However, if you look at a company's balance sheets or any kind of a Series A or B or C proposal, the retention rates of a company will be super key indicators as to the financial health and well-being of that organization. So if you're going for a large Series C investment and you have massive customer churn, that is going to affect the valuation of that business. So the ability for an organization to be able to service its rapidly growing customers as they scale without having churn or what is a leaky bucket of losing customers is really important for the financial performance of a business, especially where you have companies now that are recurring revenue based. So a lot of like hot companies now have recurring revenue streams. And the strength of a recurring revenue stream is cash, it's liquidity. That's what like an early stage business and indeed a tenured or mature business needs is recurring revenue. And the safety of recurring revenue, which is our bread and butter every day, is MRR, monthly recurring revenue, or ARR, annual recurring revenue, is really key. And customer success is a massive part of that because it's creating, if you have very little churn, your sales team can build on that, and it makes a really healthy valuation for the business. And often, like the PE ratios or the price ratios of companies that have really strong revenue retention and really strong churn or protection of churn can be very highly multiplied values of valuations on businesses. So from my point of view, and I think if you go to the Motley Fool or you read like Yamini or Brian Halligan or previous CEOs, earning calls transcripts to the street, they will speak not just about like their customer acquisition, but they will talk about the retention levels and the satisfied customer base at HubSpot and how we can actually still grow to 133,000 customers without the wheels falling off, both their ability to service those customers and indeed the financial performance of the business. So I think that's where in kind of the first and second part of your question, what I think customer success is, and that can wildly change due to the culture and the performance of a certain business and the maturity where they are in the life cycle. And then secondly, the importance of a customer success business in terms of like the bottom line of the performance of any tech company, be they a large public multinational like HubSpot or an early stage, Series A, B, C, young, hungry business.
That's a fantastic comprehensive answer. Thanks so much, Padraic. The other element, I think, to customer success is the impact that great customer success teams have on product development.
Yeah.
So if you've got a great customer success team, you're going to be really, really close to the customer, and you're going to really, really understand what the customer needs, and you can then feed those into product. Do you see that at HubSpot as well? Yeah,
it's rampant. And it kind of where I saw it at Google and LinkedIn, I think at HubSpot it's on steroids. The company from the executive team down originally has always been customer obsessed, doing wrapped around like delighting the customer is a mantra. So that interface between CS and product and sales is really, really, really important. And if our CEO would speak way more enthusiastically about it than I would, like it's in her DNA. It's also kind of one of the benefits of CS that I really love in a company that is very CS orientated. Is why I love being customer success, is that you have to, and it's in terms of I think there was you said you might talk about what it's like to work in CS, or what kind of people you need in CS. The ability to work with a ton of different people, both internally and externally, is key. If you look internally into the organization you're in, any CS business needs to work hand in hand with sales to speak to how they grow the existing install base of customers. Not just have to spend all the time looking externally for net new customer acquisition, which is tough and expensive. They need to work hand in hand with product in terms of being what we call the voice of the customer. And we even have specific VOTC, or voice of the customer, teams within customer success at HubSpot, whose job it is solely to actually listen and feed back to those teams. So between CS and product, they are constantly listening and also pulling in CS customers to amplify messaging to our customers as well. But to work closely with product, any given week, I'll be working with product, and my customer success managers will be too. Product, our contract management team for renewals, our sales teams, our executive teams for executive sponsorship or voice of the customer calls, legal for specific RFPs or for specific contracts that need to be set up in specific legalese for unique global entities. They'll be working with finance. They could be working with our collections teams, and they could be working with our massive support organization who are always on and helping our customers daily in terms of like support in incoming support queries. So you can be easily working with 8 different functions any given week. And so you need to be able to create alliances internally within the business you're in. You need to have that contact in legal. You need to have that person in product that you know is the sub-owner of the chatbot in the Service Hub product, who is in a certain place in Boston, and who's the key person behind that product piece to submit product feedback, or what we call customer roadblocks, which we actually send on a weekly basis to our product teams, which are large roadblocks that our largest customers are finding, that are friction points. So that's where internally any CS person or a CS organization really needs to be working with a ton of functions every week, because your customers are constantly requiring you do that. And like, to use a awful American term, like that's where the CSM or the customer success manager is often the internal quarterback for a customer to say, listen, this global customer is pushing HubSpot to its very limits. I need to be able to get onto our engineering team to get them, specific set up on, so they're not breaking our API calls or our deal limits per day because they're just pushing the system to its very limit. They need to be the quarterback to say, I can't fix that, but I'll tell you what, I'll find out internally who can, and to be able to build those alliances, pull them in, and what we call SFTC, or solve for the customer at the end of the day. So that's where the CSM can be like the quarterback or the front person with an entire team of cross-functional partners internally to make sure that customer succeeds. And that's a real skill. And it's not like a lone wolf mentality. You're never going to be able to understand the technical complexity required to solve an issue, but you'd be damn sure that any of the team will know who can, and will build those alliances. And similarly, externally, a CSM will have to often work with multiple functions: sales teams, marketing teams, operations teams, revenue teams, executive teams. On the customer side, especially in large organizations, to be able to navigate that organization and help grow them, and indeed sell to them too, and to bring in multi-functions for at the customer side to make the software or HubSpot work for them too. So I think that's where the joy of customer success is, and a lot of the skills really are around like alliance building, communication skills, as not just the raw kind of solutions engineering type technical capacities that you would have. So I think that's what makes a great CSM and makes like customer success very, very key as a player that interfaces so directly with not just product, but with a ton of teams around now as well.
Interesting. And how would you, if you were at business school wanting to get into customer success, what would your tips be for those people?
If I was in business school versus the field, I think to be two different things. I think you got to know where your heart lies. Like some salespeople would take terrible customer success managers. Some salespeople make amazing customer success managers, and vice versa. It kind of depends where your good is. If you love the thrill of the chase and the speed of moving from one relationship to another, and to like figuring a customer out, making a big sale, and then like moving on. Like sales is probably a great place for you to learn how customers buy, what they look for, how to influence people. However, like I've got a lot of salespeople working on my team that have come from sales in large organizations, and they eventually met a point in their career where they said, Padraic, I'd love to thrill the chase, but I want to get involved in like multi-year, longer-term relationships and growth stories now. And neither is better or worse, and they're indeed paid very differently, structured very differently. But that's where they're looking more long-term and deeper in terms of longer consultancy model or kind of strategic value to an organization or customer's organization. And that's where then they might be looking more towards customer success. So I think figuring out where you like to play in the sales cycle is a good place to start. Is it like super new, bringing them on? Is it somewhere in between? Like, is it right before deal where you're brought in as a consultant to kind of help soften the deal through and position it? Or is it straight after where you love to onboard companies and work with them after the sale, but then move off to another company? That's kind of a mix of both. That'd be an onboarding team, to that onboarding team's giving the customer to customer success. And if it's more longer term looking forward, maybe that's the place for you. Or then do you prefer to live in a radial around that? Like, do I like to work on product? And then there's product managers that I know at HubSpot. Some of them, there's two types, right? There's a product manager that would love to jump on a call with a customer. Nothing better than like, give me a customer, I'll jump on, I'll go through a user flow, I'll do some design thinking with them, and I'm going to pick up so much from listening to this customer speak. And there's other product managers that would make them sweat, and they just wouldn't want to get out of bed. They'd be like, I want to stick to my Kanban board and ship product from A to B. I don't want to be bothered by a regular customer calls. And they do it, but they just find it more distracting. They'd rather like scale. So there's different types of product managers too, and often the kind of product managers who might come into customer success are the ones that are amazing engineers and they're amazing at designing products, but they're really, really good at working with customers too and love doing that. And they like being customer facing. And that's where if I was a product manager who loved that, I'd be like, maybe I could get into customer success and work directly and bring my institutional knowledge of how to design products and listen to customers directly to the customer, and then influence product organization back the other way. So I think it really depends on where you live in terms of the customer life cycle, what really kind of excites you, what just gets you out of bed in the morning, what you find rewarding, and then or else whether you're in a radial around that, like in product or legal or a sales team, and want to transfer into CS. So I think it just depends on the kind of person you are, to be honest. I know that's a long-winded answer and it's vague, but you just got to understand like what really excites you and pushes you to learn and get excited in the customer life cycle, and go from there.
What about customer success as a springboard to other business disciplines? Have you seen that in HubSpot, where people have joined HubSpot as a customer success manager and then gone on to other business functions?
Yeah, a ton. Like that's the kind of beauty of a lot of, going back to your original point, like around tech companies. They're all like matrix organizations, right? There's tons of functions. Like your career growth in customer success or any business in tech, if there's generally in my experience at Google, LinkedIn, or HubSpot, there's tons of opportunity all around you. It doesn't have to be linear. There's like going up, and I call it like widening the pyramid. So rather than going straight up in one chain from like salesperson, sales manager, sales director, like chief sales officer, whatever, that like I think in tech it's very easy to widen your pyramid. So moving up the pyramid by flattening it, by getting more wider experience. And a lot of CEOs, for instance, if you're in business school, you're doing an MBA and you want to be a director or a C-level executive, quite often a lot of C-level, especially in tech companies, are multidisciplinary and come from many different functions versus just one linear model. Now, that might be different in different industries, but in tech, it's not uncommon to have a chief executive or an executive who's coming from multidisciplines, and they move from sales to customer success to product over their tenure. And great executives can do that. And I think that's where in CS, and certainly in HubSpot anyway, there's always opportunity around you to widen your pyramid versus just CSM 1, 2, CSM manager, director, customer success, whatever. So I think where I've seen people move on, to get to the nub of your question, sales is a great experience as well. People often will be really good at keeping and growing customers and go, hang on, I'm like pretty good at discovering opportunity within my customers and like putting massive revenue numbers on the board. Maybe I should be getting over to sales and getting paid more. And having a very different kind of sprint here. And that's where people have gone. And people as well have gone to operations teams where they actually are able to sit back and look at a customer success cohort and look at 20,000 customers and go, hang on, not just my book of 20 or 50 or 150 customers. I love sitting back and looking at the data of 20,000 of them and saying, hang on, there's this cohort has a massive upgrade opportunity here. There's issues of product in this piece. This region isn't doing great. Why is that? And they're able to parse out a lot of business insights from data. And a lot of those people can go into, for instance, operations teams or business intelligence teams, where they're able to look at, and you kind of see this quite early on in some CSMs, where they're quickly looking at their entire book and they're zooming in. I know where to invest my activity here at a scale. And then once you have that reflex, it's quite easy to just zoom out 10 levels and look at that cohort multiplied by 10. But that's the way their mind thinks. So they can often end up in business insights and in operations, which are teams that grow a lot as a company grows in later maturity cycles or stages too. A lot of our team have gone on to product, or some of our team have gone to product, exactly, where they've really got a skill and a capacity to work with a product organization. And they've worked hand in hand with them to the point where then a role comes up in product and they're like, hey, Robbie, why don't you come over the fence here? Because you're doing a lot of work with us already. We have a new customer experience team that was built this year as well at HubSpot, which is much more around the overall customer experience. And a lot of CS people are looking at that because they have the raw muscle in terms of understanding the complexities and the needs of our customers, all the way to finance, operations, all this kind of stuff. But I think some of my team have gone to management as well directly in other functions, like in our support organization. So if you're looking to grow out of an individual contributor role to own a business or to manage people and lead people, you can do that in any, in a lot of functions. You can do it either with junior salespeople, you can do it in our support organization, who often is people much earlier in their career, which is really interesting as a first-time manager. So I think that's where traditionally people in our CS business have gone off, either vertically or sideways in management opportunities at HubSpot.
Well, it sounds like an incredible springboard into a world of opportunity. Let's move on now, Padraic, into the part of the conversation where we dig into some of your personal influences. Yeah. So one of the questions that we like to ask is around favorite books. So is there a particular book that has sort of guided you on your journey so far?
I don't know if there's any way that's guided me on my journey per se, because I've just been I just love reading everything from, I don't know, like astrophysics stuff I don't understand, but it makes me sleep better. And it's just fascinating to read, to Steinbeck, to tech literature, to music biographies. So I don't think there's been any massive formative book that I've read and gone, this has directly impacted my career. But I think there is two books. The most recent book I read that was impactful career-wise was called Absolute Ownership. And it's written by two ex-Navy SEALs. And it's around how discipline and stepping up and owning situations, be they good or bad, has been really formative. And I kind of get a lot of juice from that book because it'll go into a battlefield scenario and give a really cool, exciting war story. And then it'll go into a business example of that, where they were acting as consultants in their years after the Navy SEALs, where they were going into organizations to help develop them, to help reorganize them, where they would take those lessons into a business context and help like bring up the sense of ownership of that team and the structuring or discipline of that team. That's a book I really enjoy reading, and you can dip in and out of. It's not a heavy book, and you can land in a war chapter or a consultancy chapter kind of on the bathroom any given day. But it's just one of those good handy books to pick up, and I've given that to a lot of my team over the years, and I learned a lot from it as a manager and just owning the shit out of whatever situation you're in. It's good, bad, or indifferent. You need to step up, and I try and lead these people as best you can. So I think that's one book, and then more recently, but I think favorite book of all time, like Orwell's 1984, I think just still is, as a technophile since I was a kid. I mean, that was technically written in the 40s, like the 1940s, and it's absolutely relevant. It was relevant in the 80s when I read it, when I was like 10, and it was relevant when I saw it on a stage in New York like 3 years ago. It's exactly relevant today. It's just a wonderful book. Massive portent of everything that's happening today, way before any of this tech really properly existed in any kind of mainstream, outside of like some small Stanford labs potentially. But 1984 is just still, if you're to have one book that's as relevant today as it ever was, that's just a great read, a good story, well written. If I was to have a first edition of a book, I'd love to have Orwell's 1984. Yeah,
I agree. I saw 1984 in the theatre a few years ago in London, and it was eerily prescient, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And what about a quote, Padraic? Is there a particular saying that you keep in the back of your mind as you journey through your career?
Yeah, there's kind of two. First is always be learning, which I always knew, but I never really had a quote for it, and I think it was a Jobs quote eventually. But I remember seeing and going, that's what I've been thinking the whole time. Okay, that's way more like marketing focused and way more eloquent of a quick quote. Is always be learning. So yeah, like I said, I came from Jobs originally, but I think at any stage in my career, like I spoke originally, like you just got to be learning. As long as you're learning something, you're going to be pretty enthused to get out of bed and like tackle the day and get better as a human being, whatever it is. And the minute you're not learning anymore is the minute you're stale as an artist. If you're not pushing yourself, if you're lazy, if you're writing the same stuff, you're not growing, you're dead over time. You're not gonna, you're not gonna last in the long term. It's the same in business. I think you just always have to be learning, pushing yourself, being like honest enough that you don't know everything. And there's a ton out there that is just really exciting and sexy to learn, and go learn it. So I think that's where at any junction of being at, always be learning is key, and it keeps you humble as well, and keeps you hungry in terms of knowing and appreciating that there's a shit ton out there you know nothing about. No matter how much of an expert you think you are in a specific small field, and that's what business school I found was great for. Was stepping out of the quarter on quarter language of tech and the same things that are spoken about and the same rampant growth targets that you're eating. It's like to step out and go, hang on, there's actually a world outside of this that is like in the wider business context that is really valuable. So I think always learning is my main one, and the second one is, which I think keeps you honest and keeps your integrity clean, which is, if you've got really good integrity and you're always learning, you're going to do fine in your career. You're going to bring people with you. People might lead you if you need to lead them, and you're going to be good at what you do because you're hungry and you're learning. So I think in terms of integrity, it's a really key thing that my dad installed in me early on in my career. Is just like integrity, and I think the best quote around that was mentioned in, I think it might be from the Bible, which is. It's odd as I'm an atheist, but it was mentioned in Paul Thomas Anderson's 1998 movie Magnolia, which is top 5 movies of all time. My favorite director, outside of Kubrick, is in Magnolia. The character says, "Oh, you may be through with the past, but the past ain't through with you." And it's a quote that's always been in the back of my head. That as you pivot, you move companies, you move careers from music to thing to whatever, is like, you should keep being honest and keep having integrity, because you may be through with the past and you're ready to write something off, but it may not be through with you. So it keeps keeps me kind of straight and narrow and a good sense of integrity over time. But yeah, that was thanks to not the Bible, but Paul Thomas Anderson's Magnolia.
That's fantastic. I haven't heard that quote before. But it's one that I'll certainly keep in my toolkit. And then lastly, Padraic, because this podcast is all about employability, what is your favorite interview question? Firstly, and then secondly, how would you yourself answer that question?
I was hoping you wouldn't ask the second part of that. My favorite question is one that I only throw to candidates that I think are going to get the job. So it's a bit of a stinker. And I wouldn't throw it out like at the start of an interview. But generally, people have a very good understanding of what others think about them. What they think about others. They often have a less understanding of what the other people's opinion of themselves. And what they even have a lesser understanding of is what other people think about them that they know is actually wrong. That takes like a kind of an inception level, to continue the movie references, of like self-awareness to understand that. So to try and get to that, I will sometimes ask an interviewee, if I was to speak to your manager today, hypothetically, obviously won't, what would something that they think about, let's say you, Freddie, if you're a boss, right? What's if I was to speak to your manager today, what would something be that they think about you, Freddie, that isn't actually true? So it requires a self-awareness to know what your manager thinks of you, but also to what you can parse out that is actually you is not actually the case. And that can often uncover as well a second layer of conflict. And that can be my boss thinks I'm this and I'm not, because they're wrong. And it's kind of like, it's self-aware, but it's coming from the wrong spot because they're not. Are they going the extra step to say this is why they think that? And is that because of something I'm doing? Or is that their fault? Purely their fault, which it rarely is. It's usually because of something both. So it can usually go to a second layer of manager conflict, or it can be my manager thinks I'm this, but I'm not. But you know what? They're right because I do this. And sometimes, but I need to do that a bit more because that perception is wrong. Now that's a great answer, but people will generally have never prepared for that. And this third level of interest I like in the response is, because it's such a hard question, I will preface it with, if you need to pause and take a moment to think about this, please do, because you shouldn't have prepared for this. So we'll give them that leeway to pause. Do they then just run and start trying to answer the question straight off the bat? Or are they confident enough to stop and to think, and at the end of an interview, you should have a bit of psychological safety at this stage, so that this is why I put it to the end, to say, are they comfortable enough to say, good question, Boris, you need to think about that, and take 2 minutes to think and articulate an answer in the moment? Or do they just start blagging because they're nervous, or they don't know, or they're too not confident enough to stop and pause and think? So how they answer the question, and if they stop at the end of 2 minutes and go, that's a doozy, Borg, I'm not sure could I have that, and they give a half answer, I'll go, well, at least they stopped and paused. But that for me is a really tough question that my mentor and boss's boss, like when he employed me for my job at LinkedIn, asked me. I remember going, nice, I like that.
I can see why it also has particular application for customer success, because as a good CSM, you need to really understand what the customer really is thinking, and you then need to play that back to the business with complete honesty. So yeah, I can see why that one works really, really well.
Yeah, and you're right around the customer success piece. A lot of it is around, it's a pure act of listening. It's around like telling the customer something, but making sure that, have they understood it? Is it moving? Is it really of value? And a lot of it is kind of sales on steroids. It's really around deep objection handling and deep active listening.
So I'll be kind on you, Padraic. We'll move swiftly on so that you don't need to answer how you would answer it in an interview situation.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. It's fine. We've got 3 questions from our community, which would be great to get through. So the first is from a guy called Rohan, and he says, what are some of the key traits you look for in your ideal customer success candidates?
Okay. I'll try and answer these, Freddie. I'm not sure how much learning we get from them, but Rohan, good question. I would say ownership. Is this person able to stand up and own a big win? And is this person able to stand up and speak to our executive team when one of our biggest customers in the world churns? And are they able to stand up and say, yeah, I own this. This is what happened. Here's the story. Here's all the behaviors we displayed to the business to save this customer over 6 months. Here's everything we've tried, everything we and then the learnings we're going to take back in terms of our push-up market, that we need to learn from this. And they own the wins and they own the losses. So I think that's kind of an intangible, but you know it when you see it. I think a deep empathy, and that doesn't mean weakness. I think it's an ability to actively listen and understand and parse out issues. And I don't think you can be empathetic without being an amazing active listener. So I think that matters. I think an element of technical expertise is useful, but in no way relevant. And that expertise can often change from company to company anyway, so it has to be relearned. So ownership, empathy, active listening. And I think communication skills, like really strong communication skills. Can this person go in and hold their own with the executive team of another company or our company, be able to communicate clearly and articulately in written and in presentation, or in meetings and Zoom? It's even more important these days. Its own unique skill. And great communicators can listen, they can solve problems, and they can build alliances, which I think, if you can't work with other teams in a customer success business, you won't succeed in it, or you really won't find much joy in it. It's not a lone wolf business. So I think great communication skills allow you to, or allow a CSM to build those alliances, both at the customer and the organization. So I think those probably, Rohan, are 3 traits that I'd look towards kind of seeing in a CSM.
Fantastic. Next question comes from Francesco, and it's music related. You'll be pleased to hear, Padraic. Okay. And his question is, as a musician, your fans are your customers. How has your experience creating music influenced your outlook in customer success?
Oh, that's a hell of a question, Francesco. That's a hard one. So, well, like if you take the Venn diagram of like the music industry and being an artist, and the Venn diagram of leading a customer success business, what's the kind of Venn grey bit in between? It's a doozy. I think, again, going back to working with and influencing people and kind of listening. I think in the music industry as an artist, you need to be really good at that. It's not just around, to really succeed, it's not just around like writing a song and suddenly you're number one. You generally have to work and influence a lot of people and listen to a lot of people. I think great bands over the years, like that we've worked with, like or toured with, let's say Oasis or U2 or R.E.M. or the Pixies, or all these bands we've closely worked with and or toured with. They're all like really, really good businesses. They're all like, they take care of their people. They know how to work with people. They treat them well in the long term. And they're well-run operations outside of just the raw kind of hurricane of talent that exists within the core members, right? But even the ability to be able to work with a small member of like a high conflict group is really important. I think the music industry taught me a shit ton about conflict management and around how to take different opinions, not be precious about them, be it in songwriting or decisions, and smash them together and not be precious about things, listen and come out with something better. And I think in songwriting, that's a key thing. We have a few different songwriters or people writing music like we did in our band, was can you take lots of different opinions, not be precious about them, accept them, and build something greater. I think that's been in music is always really relevant, and in tech is super important as well. It's, can you listen to other opinions, and every year are you willing to change? So you have one of my quotes is you have your whole life to write your debut album.
I like that. Yeah.
Very little time to write your second. So you, in terms of like from album one on, and that's your career, you need to be listening, changing, pivoting, pushing yourself to learn and change. Unless you hit some weird like mode of music that is just universal and never change and keep writing for the rest of your life and it'll sell. You generally have to listen and change and push yourself anyway, year on year, or album on album, or tour on tour, have a different look, a different feel, a different production setup, different vibe to the songs, a different artistic influence. And I think that year on year change from first album, second album, third album, or tour on tour is a really good experience of having to look at things differently. The next one has got to be different. And in customer success and in tech, we've gone through 3 years. We've gone through 3 different main key performance indicators or metrics in 3 years. We followed one metric one year, another one next year, and a new one this year. And this year will be a bit quieter, but every year we've had to reshift the way we look at the business to meet the 128% growth that HubSpot will be pegging to the street. And we've had to work within that. I think that like non-preciousness around like looking at things differently each time, listening to opinion, tearing it all up, and doing it again.
You've launched 3 debut albums in the past 3 years, then, Padraic.
I don't know, but I think we did have a target when we were younger, was to release our first 3 albums in 3 years, and do it like they used to do back in the 60s, which like a lot of the greatest albums through like 1966 to 70 were written in that way. But there was like bands would release one a year. Alas, the larger machinery and our physical and mental health didn't cater for the ability to do that. But I think that's something from the music industry to business or CS. I think is as applicable. I think.
Yeah, that's a really interesting answer. And actually, Francesco has a music background, and he's looking to break into tech. So hopefully that will be a really useful guiding light for him. And then lastly, we have a question from Anne, and she says, "What are the things that you've learned in business schools that have helped you become a leader within customer success?"
Good question as well. So who was that from, Anne? Nice question, Anne. I think if you go back to the reason that I went to business school, which is good because it means that the reason I went was what I got from it, versus being a complete waste of time and money, which it wasn't. It enabled me to see things outside of just my little world around me, which is where it was my job to be in. It enabled me to pull me out to understand business more widely and to understand the organization around me that I'm in as an organization, and how CS or whatever function I'm in inside of that matters. So it's very easy to think that when you're working customer success, that customer success is HubSpot. It's not. It's one of the many, many functions in our business that makes our company work. But I went back to business school to say, listen, I've been 6 years at LinkedIn. It's 24 quarters back to back. And I was like exhausted, and I'd be going, I want to figure out how business works again. And I was starting to see things in a very siloed way, and I wanted to kind of just pull out and understand like organizations and businesses better. So my goal was to then be able to be in a board meeting with any organization, or let's say tech business. If I was to sit down with the head of Microsoft in their annual meeting, or with their chief executives, or their C-level rather, and if I was hearing the finance team talking, or the legal team talking, or the operations team talking, or the accounting team talking, or the sales business, all the pillars and the wheels of what makes organizations tick, if I was to sit at the board, would I be able to understand each of those presentations to a basic degree? And the net goal would be to could I then ask potentially in each of these breakouts one question that didn't sound completely stupid, that was in some way articulate, right? So I think that was the goal, was that I would understand like how organizations work so that I could be better working in the wheel that I'm in, because I know how to maximize it for the benefit of the wider organization versus just being sucked in and lost in that little micro world you're in quarter on quarter. And I do feel now that if I'm reading the earnings call report, I understand what they're saying about the debt, the way the business is capitalized, or the debt structure of the organization, or the maturity of where it is, or the competitive landscape, versus just thinking about our customer acquisition or retention rates and my team of like 11 that I'm trying to build to this, that, and the other. I can understand like in the company all hands, if legal are speaking or finance are speaking or our accounting team are speaking, I kind of know what they're talking about. Now, I'm not going to be in any way able to work in that company, in that function, but I'm sitting there and I'm going, I get where they're coming from and why it matters. And that for me was the simple goal of business school, was to be able to go back into whatever function I was in, and customer success is the one I'm at, HubSpot, and understand where the company is going, how it's structured, and why my job in this piece matters, and how I can do that job better to make that wheel move more effectively and add more value for the wider like ecosystem or the wider business that it's spinning in. And that for me was just the simple goal of business school, and hopefully that's what I've learned is that when I sit back and see a big decision made by a VP, that I don't go, oh no, why doesn't my team really suffers because of this? This is stupid. I don't get this. Doesn't make any sense at all. And I kind of go, okay, my team really suffers because of this. I really hate their decision, but I see exactly why they made it, and I feel better now that I can appreciate the larger strategic decisions that are made. It might be wrong, it might be right, but I can understand the rationale behind them a little bit better now, and that enables me as a leader to understand the why behind those decisions, and then hopefully be able to mobilize whoever's beside me to a certain direction on the back of that decision that has been made 9 levels above me, versus my kind of role as a kind of middle manager, that I can kind of hopefully mobilize and contextualize that decision or that change to move my business where it might need to go. I feel I'm a little bit better at that than I was before business school.
Well, that's a wonderful place to end our conversation, Padraic. It's been a real pleasure, chatting to you today, and I was pretty confident that it would, be a good show and would provide, a lot of value to our audience, and I'm pretty confident that it will do that. So thanks so much, and it sounds like HubSpot is an incredible place to work, and I encourage as many of our audience as possible to go check it out, especially customer success.
Absolutely, hit me up. And yeah, always a pleasure to speak to you. Thanks for putting the time in. Really appreciate it.
Great. Cheers. Bye.